without seaweed, we wouldn't really have lab
a lot
stuff.
Of science, yeah.
A lot of science wouldn't really exist.
Right.
Vaccines would be looking very differently, or at least the administration of vaccines would be looking very differently. So seaweed is just like that girl.
Yes,
you know?
exactly. I was literally about to say that. Oh my gosh. Okay. Welcome, everyone, again. And welcome to The Joy Report, a podcast dedicated to sharing stories about positive climate solutions and environmental justice, grounded in intersectionality and optimism. My name is Arielle V. I am an environmental justice strategist and educator passionate about making environmentalism irresistible. And so we've done a lot of our thank yous already. And so I'm just going to switch over so that we can start our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional homelands of the Lenape people, known as Lenapehoking. The Lenape have stewarded these lands and waters for thousands of years, long before the arrival of settlers, and continue to maintain deep connections to them today. And as we come together for Climate Week, we honor the Lenape and all Indigenous peoples for their enduring care for the earth. Let us work, and all climate work, acknowledge, integrate, and honor Indigenous voices, leadership, and sovereignty as essential to a just and sustainable future. Thank you. All righty. So my wonderful guests are right here next to me, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with them this evening. First, right next to me is Nicholas. Nicholas Kee is the founder and CEO of Kee Farms. Kee Farms is a regenerative ocean network in Jamaica that's focused on growing seaweed, oysters, and other oceanic organisms with the aim of reducing greenhouse gases and increasing biodiversity in oceanic ecosystems. He's also collaborated with institutions from UNICEF to CAF to the World Bank while training fisherfolk and youth to build resilient, inclusive, blue-green economies. So let's give a round of applause for Nicholas. And next we have Alexis. Alexis Nikole Nelson, known as @BlackForager on Instagram, is a forager and outdoor educator who uses her platform to yell, sing, and celebrate all the edible plants hiding in plain sight. She's cooked up quite a few awards, including receiving the James Beard Award for Best Social Media in 2022 and being chosen for the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Through Alexis's content, she takes audiences into the woods and to the oceans in search of edible plants to enrich their palates and the planet. So let's give Alexis a warm welcome as well. So as I mentioned, this conversation today is about seaweed and all of the other solutions that we can find underwater. Let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to ask both of you this first question. How did your relationship to the ocean start? Would you like to start?
Sure. Mine is pretty simple. I live on an island.
There we go.
It's not.
There we go. Wait, but which island though?
The one in the Caribbean, not like.
But
not
which
like
one?
Manhattan. Jamaica.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So I live close on island. I live close to the sea, and so it was kind of it's not very hard to get out there.
Fair.
That's it. I don't really have a complicated answer for that.
It's becoming harder these days.
Answer.
Yeah. Thank you. It's becoming harder to access the oceans in Jamaica, though, right? So
yes, it's particularly tenuous because we are losing more and more of our public access to the beaches. I want to say maybe 97 to maybe 98% of our beaches are privately owned by the tourism industry. Which is mostly owned by foreigners, and that's a whole other
conversation, and not joyful. So
whole other neo-colonial kind of conversation.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Thank you. And Alexis, how about you? How did your relationship to the ocean start?
So my mom's family, we are Cape Verdean. So
yes,
other Cape Verdeans in the chat. Thank you. I thought I heard some other loud people in this room. And so when a lot of Cape Verdeans were making the move, both in the 1700s and in the 1800s, after a pretty awful famine in which Portugal, which Cape Verde belonged to until the 70s, kind of left them high and dry. There was a lot of immigration directly from Cape Verde to Cape Cod. Funny enough, and we didn't necessarily have the science to back it up then, but we do now. Because of the directions of the currents, there's a whole lot of shared oceanic biodiversity between the oceans just off of Cape Cod and the islands, and the biodiversity just off of the Cape Verde Islands as well. And so it makes sense that they found a place that felt a lot like home and stayed there, learned how to steward the lands and the water there. The whaling industry, for all of the bad things about it, it very heavily employed Cape Verdeans and a lot of my ancestors during its heyday. And so my family has just been on and in, the northern Atlantic waters since time immemorial, really. So going and spending time with my Nana, gathering seaweed on the beaches in Martha's Vineyard or off Cape Cod, those are some of my earliest and most fond memories. I've always, felt this attachment where maybe I see a lot of people feel fear to the oceans and the deep waters and what lives there. But for me, that's just always been a source of joy and seaweed, which I used to throw at my sister and now throw onto my own plate.
Amazing. Great. So Nicholas, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that are happening in the Caribbean right now and in the Caribbean region. Why is the Caribbean so important to the conversation related to climate advocacy and climate justice right now?
So the Caribbean Sea is a prime example of where things can thrive, and we've been thriving just generally as a region, because we have so many islands that is just filled with people who are connected very deeply to the ocean. We get a lot of our food from the ocean. Our livelihoods generally are dependent on the ocean. The Caribbean Sea is noted to be as a decent carbon sink. And it's just rich with a whole lot of biodiversity generally. And so to think of the Caribbean, it's more so within the mainstream media, thoughts of, this area where you have a lot of tourists that come, they swim and they look at the coral reefs, they probably go to the beaches, they go to some bungalows, and they don't necessarily realize that in order for you to at least access this type of beauty, it is dependent on us pretty much taking care of the environment. A lot of our coral reefs, for example, are heavily bleached, and they're basically at risk of just never coming back. And so, if we don't start to think deeply about some of the concerns, it's a case where you as tourists, I say you more broadly speaking, tourists generally won't feel enticed to even come to the Caribbean. But beyond that, because about 70% of our general GDP within the Caribbean is dependent on tourism, livelihoods would be lost as well.
Certainly. Thank you for that context. And Alexis, I'm so curious, how did you come up with the name Black Forager, and why did you decide that was going to be the name you wanted to use for your platform?
Well, when I was first starting to want to document the wild food that I was making for myself, I was fresh out of college, like a lot of recent college grads, just super broke, just laughably little amounts of money in my bank account. But one thing that's really great about foraging is it's a beautiful way to get a diversity of colors and textures and nutrition onto your plate for free. And so that's what I started doing, and I wanted to keep track of what I was making, mostly for me, but also I knew there was a community of other foragers online, and I wanted to be able to be a part of the conversations they were having. Now, way back when being like a decade ago, before vertical video was the be-all, end-all of social media, it was a lot of, still high contrast overhead shots of food, very bon appetit. And I wanted to make sure that people knew, even if they were just looking at a top-down shot of a beautifully plated bitter crust salad, that they knew that that food, the energy behind it, the knowledge behind that recipe was coming from a Black person. You know, we get excluded from a lot of conversations about outdoor spaces and about outdoor activities. And it was really important for me for people to not be able to erase that part of my identity every single time that they were interacting with my content. So I chose the name Black Forager. At least once a year, I still have to explain to everybody why, which is crazy. In this year of Beyonce 2025. At this point, I'm just like, if me saying that I'm a Black forager makes you uncomfortable, that's some work you have to do.
Truly. Yeah.
I cannot keep doing this emotional labor for you.
No.
But that was the reasoning behind choosing that name.
Thank you. And so I think that really ties into a question that I wanted us to explore. What has been your experience as Black people in the climate space? I'm also a Black person, for those who are not aware, who aren't in this room.
Surprise!
Hi.
Oops, all Black.
Right. Exactly, all Black, which is still something that doesn't happen often in the climate space.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm just curious, like, what has the experience been like for you both? Where do you feel really empowered as a Black environmentalist in this work? And where do you still feel a little silenced in your work? Yeah.
We were even just talking about this right when we first got here.
You go ahead first.
I mean, it really is a double-edged sword. We have reached this point in climate activism where there is a general awareness that people of color we suffer faster, we suffer harder at the hands of climate injustice. So people know that they need to be listening to us. People know that they need to be centering POC in these conversations. But you still sometimes see folks getting really uncomfortable when you remind them of why. The angriest comments that I get every year are always when I'm reminding people that traditional European and now American style conservation is rooted in a lot of racism, a lot of erasure of the indigenous stewardship that happened before we got here, and a lot of erasure and ignorance around a lot of our ability to steward the lands, even when we are visitors and even when our ancestors maybe were not from here. There's this kind of assumption that we will always be as extractive as, say, $1 billion corporation being led by a white man more often than not. And that is just not demonstrably the case. We see in real time that is not what is happening. You know, people of color, especially indigenous groups around the country, are the defenders of our biodiversity right now. And so it can get tough. The conversations can get fraught. There are a lot of people, especially, with me being a forager, I'm also in a lot of spaces and grouped with like hunters and trappers, because when it comes down to it, we do a lot of the same work, and land access is really important to all of us. But it doesn't necessarily make people happy when I remind them that the reason why we're able to figure out things like paperwork for fishing, licenses for hunting, but we don't necessarily do the same for foraging is because some of those activities are predominantly done by white men and some of them are not. And so we keep pushing. And, if it takes me singing a cute song 9 times to then be able to sneak in on that 10th video and remind people of these truths, then I'm always happy to do it.
And we're grateful that you do it. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And what about you, Nicholas?
Okay, so the role that I play within the climate change space, within the context of my work, is multifaceted. So I run this farm, but it is not just a farm. It happens to be a nonprofit, a U.S. nonprofit. With respect to how things work, the climate action piece is just one piece of the puzzle. A lot of the other things that I have to do are related to looking at policy, looking at legislation in different jurisdictions. I take part in a lot of climate negotiations. I represent my country sometimes. Sometimes I represent other countries and other governments. Sometimes I'm negotiating with other multinational organizations that are supposed to be helping to resource a lot of the work that we do in the Caribbean and generally the global South. And admittedly, it's extremely difficult. Last year, for instance, when we were going through, well, I guess when you guys were going through the whole transition of presidency, or at least the elections, more broadly speaking, I remember sitting down with a lot of US federal workers. We were at a table, sitting down eating, discussing things that, we could possibly move the needle on with respect to how we think about like climate and U.S. relations in relation to the global South. And it happened to be the night of the election, where I was different time zone and everything. And so we were just like in the midst of, eating and talking. And then we heard the results, and the room kind of got silent because the legislators that were eating with us, they knew exactly what that meant. They knew exactly that it meant that they would be basically be pulling out of the Paris Agreement. They knew that millions or even billions of lives would be lost because resources would be ripped from global South communities. They knew that it would have disastrous effects for how we think about food security. Oceans are basically being decimated by a lot of the non-agreements or even the notions of, I guess, pillaging the oceans for profit. And so there isn't much safeguard. Unfortunately, and I guess fortunately, the U.S. has played a huge role historically in positioning how we think about protecting the earth, because you guys just, I guess, by coincidence, have the most resources and have that kind of pull. But when the U.S. more so has pulled out of the game, the rest of the world has watched and has been watching, and we've been silently having to reposition how we think about dynamics with respect to security, food security, water protection, the lives of vulnerable groups, especially those that are underserved within the global South. And so it's admittedly very difficult to navigate, especially as someone from a small and a developing state. We probably won't be having the same type of conversation in a couple of decades because I will have to migrate to somewhere else because I'll essentially become a climate refugee. So it's different. It's very different for me.
Of course, of course. And thank you for sharing. I want to talk a little bit more about the work that you do in Jamaica. So ocean agriculture is fairly a new concept in Jamaica because historically, wildcraft harvesting was the dominant practice. So would you be able to tell our audience and our listeners what is wildcraft harvesting and why are regenerative ocean farms a better alternative?
So typically,
sorry, I love seaweed farming, and I don't even want to talk for the rest of this entire panel. I'm so excited.
Oh man! So like the seaweed that we'll be taste testing today, more than likely, at least I would imagine so. More than likely, there would be wildcraft harvest. At least this is what I'm imagining because that is just the status quo right now. And so what that looks like is the seaweed itself grows or really truly attaches itself to like rocks or different things within the ocean, and it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And what happens is that fishermen or divers, they would just take or just harvest the seaweed and use it. And the difference between that and what I guess we're doing is a bit more comprehensive. You have models of regular seaweed farming where you typically grow things in the ocean. And so you probably, harvest some of these same seaweed samples and you curate it for cultivation. And what that looks like is you basically attach it to different lines or whatever apparatus that you choose. You lay it out into the ocean at a certain depth. You just allow it to grow. And that's a form of just general monoculture, if anything. What we're doing with respect to the entire concept of ocean farming is taking into consideration the entire ecosystem. And what this looks like is us, of course, growing the same seaweed, but also incorporating different types of biodiversity. So we grow oysters. We ensure that we maintain the seagrass. Sometimes we try to grow mangroves, or we grow near a site that, or at least another organization that is focused on mangroves. We probably do sea cucumbers, or we try to incorporate other biodiversities that is pretty much appetizing to like fish or sea turtles. And sure, they definitely eat a lot of the things that we do, but our stewardship mission is basically to ensure that we grow enough so that the entire ecosystem is satisfied. And so we're our aim is to just live in harmony with the environment.
Amazing. Do you have a question?
Oh, that always just makes me so happy to hear. Something that I find myself having to remind people in like the land-based native plant space is if other things aren't eating what you're growing, it's not part of the ecosystem.
Right. Yeah.
People will get really angry when they'll see like aphids on their milkweed. And it's like, well, that's who it's also there for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We can't only be thinking of us when we are doing these things. We are thinking of an entire ecosystem. So if no other animals are interacting with it, what are you're monoculturing?
Yeah, exactly. so we share it with the sea turtles. Like they'll eat a ton load of our seaweed. But we're like, all right, what we're gonna do?
What are you gonna do? Right. Yeah.
We might be losing profits, but we're helping,
Absolutely.
we're helping the biodiversity.
If I get to come back, let me come back as a sea turtle hanging out near one of your farms, please.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, a question for both of you is, why is seaweed so magical? Why do what do they do in the ocean, and what can you make with seaweed? Yeah, let's just talk about it.
Let me start with the foundational, and then I'll have you piggyback and you can go from
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Yes.
So seaweed, at least let me classify the type of seaweed that we grow.
Yes.
There we go.
Which is
Gracilaria and Euchema. We also have sargassum that comes in the Caribbean as well.
Okay.
But the ones that we focus on are Gracilaria and Euchema, and they're classified as sea moss.
Okay.
At least that's the mainstream classification.
Yes.
And so sea moss just happens to be this superfood. It contains about 90%, or at least not 90%, but 90 of 102 minerals and nutrients that you basically need in order to survive. Mm-hmm. So it's just a superfood off the back. You can use sea moss in many different things, from your shakes to your smoothies. Those who are from the Caribbean, porridge.
Yes. Yes.
And so you can extract these components called agar and carrageenan, and you use those in almost everything. Yeah. Okay, it's a hidden in plain sight component in toothpaste and smoothies, of course, naturally, ice cream, all your juices, some of your foods. What else? Petri dishes.
Those are all agar based. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, without seaweed, we wouldn't really have lab
a lot
stuff.
Of science, yeah.
A lot of science wouldn't really exist.
Right.
Vaccines would be looking very differently, or at least the administration of vaccines would be looking very differently. Mm-hmm. So seaweed is just like that girl.
Yes, exactly. I was literally about to say that. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Like, get you a girl who can do everything, and that is seaweed.
Exactly.
And,
What else?
with my family being from, the New England area, we're working with a completely different set of species, but so many of them are used in similar ways. Our northeastern alternative to sea moss would be Irish moss, also an excellent source of carrageenan. Also just a really delicious food source. Weirdly, Japan is sourcing a lot of our Irish moss right now for food, much more so than we are in the United States, which is embarrassing. That's why is it so hard to get seaweed on American menus? I actually have there are probably a couple answers that we could land on for that. And I'm sure that we will talk about that a little more as we go on.
Yes.
And, when you're up there, there's also several species of kelp. The further north you start moving into a lot of more like macro kelp species, as opposed to some of the like smaller, beautiful, graceful, like Gracilaria and Sargassum species when you get closer to the equator. And, part of it is really exciting seeing that sugar kelp in particular is really having a moment right now in New England, around Maine especially. You're seeing a lot of farmers working with organizations like Green Wave, putting out seeded lines. But just like Nick mentioned, what I'm not always seeing people doing is making sure that they're building a comprehensive ecosystem, which is not just good for the spaces that you're inhabiting, but it's also good for business too. Like, why not throw an oyster bag at the bottom of those three-dimensional farms? Like, it just kind of makes sense ecologically and financially. But I mean, what can you make with seaweed, girl? How much time do we have? So, I mean, kelp chips are one of my favorite uses because where my family is, we do have a lot of larger kelp species at our disposal. Orweed, sugar kelp especially, are the two that you see being used in that way. They're really good dupes for like Japanese kombu. They're all in that same genus, the Saccharina genus, so they're pretty interchangeable. I love using Irish moss. There was a pretty extensive history of Irish moss usage, both with a lot of different indigenous groups in that area, the Wampanoag, the Narragansett, but also it had a weird moment during the Victorian era where it was also being hailed as a superfood. They were like, oh my God, if your child is wayfish and sick, just make them pudding with Irish moss every day and nurse them back to health. And now, weirdly, it's just kind of faded into the background. It's one of our sources of carrageenan. Don't get me started on my carrageenan rant, because a lot of these health influencers are mean to my girl and don't even know what they're talking about.
Yeah, what's that about? Why are
my God. So, okay, the TLDR, I will get on my soapbox.
Do it. All right.
The TLDR is there are a couple of forms of carrageenan that are degraded, that are only used in lab situations, only used in testing situations, never making it outside of the lab, not making it into your food, not making it into your toothpaste. Some of those degraded forms of carrageenan have been found to cause inflammation in like mammal tissues. So, wow, it's sure a good thing that we're not feeding them to people. Someone saw one study and was just like, I recognize the word carrageenan. And now I see it in places, so now I'm mad and my kids can't have Ben and Jerry's anymore.
Wow. Wow. Well.
Oh, the other thing about seaweed too.
Yes.
Huge carbon sink. Like, it soaks up so much carbon.
Yes.
Oh my Very good for the environment.
Yes.
Not just for us. Just for healthy for the earth.
Zero input carbon sink.
So like when we grow it, we don't use fertilizer. We just let it grow.
It just does its
It
thing.
just grows.
Yeah.
We should
It's a lot less input than honestly putting trees into the ground, which is also good and which we also should keep doing.
Absolutely. Yes.
I don't want to get the tree people knocking on my door. But seaweed is truly a zero input carbon sink and a zero input food source. Right. And we are at a point where we've done so much damage with agriculture as it sits today. Yeah. That it is insane to me that we're not pushing for it to be showing up in more foods.
Yeah, exactly. So my next question was, do you think that we have reached seaweed's fullest potential? And it sounds like absolutely not. And that's despite all of the like multitudes of ways that it already is used and can be used. So what are some of the maybe like dreams that you have for the use and future of seaweed?
Okay. When I just entered into this space, I remember, what was I? I was reading some kind of study. So at least my context within the climate change space has historically been through policy. And when I wanted to start this venture, I went down this huge rabbit hole of just like trying to find ways in which to engage more intentionally with the environment. And seaweed farming just like made sense based on where I was living on an island. Um, so, so I had visions of possibly just like laying out seaweed farms for kilometers, like throughout the entire Caribbean, and then possibly having that thrown all over, the Atlantic Ocean, different types of seaweed, and we'd have different seaweed forests. And as soon as I read that seaweed is possibly the strongest biodiversity, at least facet or organism that soaks up so much carbon that it just puts trees and mangroves to shame. If we could grow seaweed, everybody should just be growing seaweed. If you live by an ocean, just like throw something out.
Exactly.
Even
Put a little spirulina tank in your house. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like everybody could be doing it.
Exactly. And so because we just don't have enough seaweed generally in the oceanic ecosystem, even if you don't want to focus on the oceanic ecosystem for now with respect to the entire ecosystem, if you just start growing seaweed, everything else will come.
Yeah.
Everything else will come.
And my dream is unfortunately, the United States forms so much of Western food ideals in this day and age. You travel anywhere around the world and you see the Golden Arches and KFC. So we really do have a say in what people view as like ubiquitous food, as comfort food. And so I think it would be really cool to see seaweed playing a much larger role. And seaweed is also such a great plant-based protein source. And I said plant-based and not vegan, because when you say vegan, people get scared, like you said boo to them or snuck up behind them. We should, as a general population, be eating more vegetables. And I think sea vegetables
it's good for your gut.
It's good for your gut. Why don't you want your microbiome to be happy? And, it's just an excellent source of a lot of vitamins and minerals, which unfortunately during the last 100 years of major agriculture, coming from Ohio, we have stripped our soil of so many different micronutrients. Growing the same vegetables in the same place someone was growing them 50, 60 years ago, you're getting less magnesium in them. Everyone seems to be discovering they're having like a weird magnesium deficiency. It's because we're not getting as much of it in our vegetables as we used to. We have done so much damage to the food that we have grown on land that it just makes sense to me to also be starting to integrate some water-based foods in as well. Everyone thinks it's going to be slimy. Everyone thinks it's going to taste like sushi. And you know what? Sometimes it is slimy and sometimes it does taste like sushi. And that's also not a problem.
It's just two different types of seaweed. You have many more.
So many. That's what we were talking about yesterday. Some friends took me out to dinner and they were at a fancy restaurant that I will not name that may or may not be going from a fully plant-based menu to a no longer fully plant-based menu next month. All the New Yorkers in the chat know exactly what I'm talking about.
It's true. We do.
And they were just like, oh, yes, this is served with a seaweed creme fraiche. And I immediately said, which one? Which seaweed? Which seaweed? What seaweed is in the seaweed creme fraiche? And they were like, oh, well, in the kitchen, sometimes we use nori and sometimes we use other seaweeds. Cool. What kinds? What flavor profiles should I be expecting from this? Not all seaweeds taste the same. Dulce is over here tasting peppery and bacony. You have kelp over here tasting rich and proteiny. You have, dead man's fingers, codium over here tasting sweet and vegetal. Like there's so many different flavors and textures that you can be getting from macroalgae. I feel like they have been unfairly maligned and put in a box for too long. My Lakota friends in North Dakota still today have two excellent words for kelp that they were like trading in from both ocean coasts. as a part of their food and agriculture systems. Like, that is how important seaweed used to be for everyone in the continental, North American area. And it'd just be kind of cool to see it get back to that point again.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important that people like both of you exist to be able to share this information and do the work and make it more visible so that we can begin to create shifts. And so I want to thank you both for your work.
Of course.
Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us,
thank you
and
for
for your
us.
work
emphasizing
that there are still good things that we can do.
Yes.
And we're doing them.
Yes.
We're trying.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the whole point of this podcast is to really emphasize the fact that solutions already exist, right? When we see the news, there's all of this doom and gloom and scary stuff when the climate crisis is, mentioned at all. But there's rarely a mention of all of the good things that are happening and the people who are doing the work to make the things happen.
Exactly.
So yeah, again, thank you. And final question, because we have to end on an exciting note. So what are you most excited about related to the world of seaweed right now?
I mean, honestly, Nick, I'm really excited that you're out here laying the groundwork for a lot of people in warmer waters to be building ecosystem-centric seaweed farms. I really hope that a lot of aquaculture everywhere around the world starts taking note of that. We were talking earlier about how this very easily could fall prey to the monoculture trap that we tend to have everything go through when it becomes popular or trendy or gets folded into our regular food systems. And so seeing people like you literally doing the work is really inspirational to me.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm excited about the possibility of scaling that same action across the rest of the Caribbean, across the global South. I'm excited about content creators like you basically setting the tone for seaweed and other types of things that we can be in a harmonious relationship with in the environment. To take a deeper dive into how we can live more intentionally with food and think about different types of food and become more experimentative and creative with food, especially with seaweed. It's not just one seaweed, okay? It's like hundreds of species and subspecies that we need to explore. We need to start thinking more imaginatively, and I'm excited that people like you are just kind of looking down that direction and inspiring others to think about the same thing.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here to be a part of this conversation. Can we give Nicholas and Alexis a big round of applause? And now, if you're wondering how you can support the seaweed movement, let's hear from another advocate we admire in the ocean sector.
I'm Daphne Lundy, Managing Director at Urban Ocean Lab. Urban Ocean Lab is a national climate policy think tank that works to reimagine how coastal cities respond to climate change. Seaweed and regenerative ocean farming is one of the many climate solutions that we highlight in our policy work. Seaweed farming can sequester carbon, enhance biodiversity, and support coastal resilience. It's both a climate solution and an example of how cities can think creatively about the resources in their surrounding waters. Seaweed is an incredible resource for people and the planet. Even if you don't live near the ocean, there are ways to support it. One simple way is through conscious consumption. Choosing sustainably sourced seaweed products, whether that's food, fertilizer for your garden, or as a packaging alternative to plastic. And you can also share knowledge. Talk about seaweed's role in carbon capture, biodiversity, and sustainable food systems. The more people understand the benefits of seaweed and its importance to climate action, the more political and social support we can build for its protection and sustainable use. Every small action, whether through purchasing, policy, or education, helps amplify the impact.
To learn more about Daphne's work at the Urban Ocean Lab and the ways to get involved in their mission to develop equitable policy solutions at the intersection of climate, cities, and coasts, visit urbanoceanlab.org. Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of The Joy Report. If you enjoyed it, please share this episode with at least one friend and keep the conversation going by posting it on social media and tagging us. And make sure you're following Intersectional Environmentalist on Instagram, YouTube, and Substack so you don't miss any updates. And remember, fighting the climate crisis is a marathon, not a sprint. We need everyone to get involved in a way that feels right for them now more than ever. Our individual positive actions do have power, and they're strengthened when we do them as a collective. I'm your host, Arielle V. King, and thank you so much for listening to this special episode of The Joy Report.